Julie said to me yesterday that she was going to sort of put me on the spot, ask me to talk about our relationship, and she's going to ask me questions. So I thought, hey, just another day. I'm just sitting in my living room, you know. It's not a big deal, you know. As we normally have a sort of a spectator crowd there as well. Sometimes it's cats, sometimes it's humans, but you know, we're never quite on our own. But it's actually, you know, it's a beautiful subject. It's a very important subject. It's a testing subject. On the way here, she asked me a technical question. How long have we been married? And I had to think, but I got the right amount in the end. It was 24 years, which means that we have been married for 24 years. And, you know, we are lucky in that we've got, you know, a happy marriage. But that doesn't mean that I am any better than anybody else. It doesn't mean that I am any more successful than anybody else. It doesn't mean that if a marriage doesn't work, that there's something wrong with you, or that you're not in some way, you know, as successful. I think, you know, these things are about people. The word is relationships, and it is about working at that relationship. And so, you know, different people have different life stories, and in our case, you know, it seems to have worked quite well. I do get asked, though, questions about it often, and I think that these discussions need to be had more openly. I mean, in my own experience, I think at the heart of any relationship, there has to be a friendship. I always take heart from the story of the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah grant him peace, and the kind of relationship he had with particularly Aisha in terms of like the running stories and how they had a race. And there's actually a second story where they had a race later on in life as well. And he beat his wife, beat her in a race, I should say. I think these kind of stories and the kind of details we got from that later part of his life show that sort of friendship, that intimacy. And you can see that friendship in his very long monogamous marriage to Khadija as well. So there is always that sort of friendship at the heart of it. And I've always seen it as a journey. I've always seen it in 3-year blocks. I don't think you can sort of think beyond that. You know, you look at a segment at a time. And you have to allow space for individuals to grow. You can't be the same person sort of 10 or 15 years down the road. You know, you have to allow for individual space for growth. People change. That doesn't mean that they're different persons. It just means that they mature, they develop different skills. And you have to allow for that kind of growth period and navigating through that. I think that we create, I mean, just to kind of go back to the kind of things that Idris was talking about, I think we have totally not got the right conversations around the subject of sex. I think that it's a very real and pressing issue for young people. I think that we are not anywhere near as open about it as even our scripture is. I think that we have prescribed it and sort of created this kind of impression of how things are supposed to work in such a fixed format that it's neither true nor does it work. And I think, you know, these have to be spoken into. These are some of these issues impact religious communities more generally. Some people know that I work very closely with Jewish schools. I work with rabbis in the education of people. I teach in a number of Jewish schools. I actually teach Islam there. And the number one question that young people ask their rabbis is around the subject of masturbation. That's the question that keeps recurring again and again. And so different faith communities have very similar questions, and they have to ask themselves, how are we dealing with it? For me, there is a general contrast in the way that we approach this and in the way that Jewish family homes approach this. We kind of always throw in the ultimate fear card. We throw in the hellfire card when everything when nothing else works, we throw that in. We throw in the punishment card. There is a much heavier emphasis in Jewish families on focusing on doing the right thing, and a much, much lesser emphasis on sort of punishment beyond the grave, so to speak. I think that there are some very, very searching questions about the whole subject of sex, and even within marriage, I think that these things are not really discussed properly and openly, and we have very sort of prescriptive ways for that. That's one element, but I do think that this is part of a life journey, and there are some very, very real issues, I think, in our societies about the behavior of people and whether they have a good marriage. I think there is always going to be, there's very often a relationship between whether people have something at home that they can go to in terms of a friendship, in terms of solace, in terms of peace, in terms of their mind being right. And that doesn't mean, again, in any way that if you don't have a good, solid relationship within your marriage, that you're necessarily going to be, a nutcase out there. It doesn't mean that at all. But I think that there is a relationship, or you can often see a relationship or a pattern between, how people behave, what they get up to, what they do, and whether or not they have that place to come to. So I think these things are much broader and much more intricate than we like to think. So I think that in the interest of this being something which affects all of us, relationships, as I'll stop here, and I'll hand it back over to Julie to see where we want to go.
Okay, not bad. So I just actually have a couple of questions which I'll ask both of you, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So I had a conversation with an imam a few years ago, and actually I think it could have easily not been an imam, it could have easily been somebody who wasn't Muslim as well. But I asked him, what's gone wrong? So many people seem to be struggling, so many people that we know are struggling out there, divorce rate is going up, not down. What's gone wrong? And he used one word, which was expectation. So he said, people's expectations are not discussed and not met, and before they get married. Do you have in a way you've kind of talked to that already but
yeah.
I don't know what you think about that, and you also what you think about his comment, because I thought it was quite powerful and quite worrying as well, that he said people don't really know what their expectation is of the other, and so it kind of can clash.
Again, I think that comes down to the fact that we're not given enough time to not even get to know your potential spouse. We're not used to it, or like I said, it's you see them 2-3 times and expected to say yes or no. Mm-hmm. It's not like where you get to sit down in a comfortable environment, in a public environment, and ask those questions. And you can't ask those questions you're not going to go into a first meeting and say, right, how much are you earning? Or what side of the bed do you prefer to sleep on at night? Or do you snore? Maybe you might ask them if they snore. But these pressing questions, like, the core questions, what are your life goals? Or what are your expectations of me as a partner, intimately as well? Stuff like that. Intimacy as well. Because intimacy is a very strong part of a relationship. And finance is a very strong part of relationships as well. It could be that both spouses, both partners are earning strong amounts of money. How are we going to work that out? And again, it comes back to this, the expectation. We don't know what to expect from it because we haven't been given the time to discuss those expectations in an open fashion. Not in a triggered fashion. It's not a triggered way or where you've been pushed into asking that sort of question. It needs to flow. You need to feel it. And I agree with, as in the Imam, when he says that it comes down to, that's not the only reason for why, but that's a strong reason for why. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you something different, actually. So one of the things that I feel, if I may just interject here, that we have done well is that we don't, as they say in America, we don't sweat the small stuff, you know, and that can mean lots of different things, but essentially, very often it can mean, for example, you have to just let stuff go. That will be within the family, between the couple. I have realised that you have to be able, so it comes down to, I guess, the word compromise. You have to be able to recognise you're two different people, and if you are too picky and hone in on too many of the small things, it never works, because you just forever spend your time just going around in those circles. And I also think that, and I'm going to pick up on this, one thing that you said about over-planning. I think that's also another issue. We've been, you know, we're fairly chilled in certain ways. Of course you have to plan, but you know, if you try and map out your whole life, if anyone hasn't already realised, it never works out how you think it's going to work out. Why? Because one of you might get ill, or a parent, you know, gets dementia, or a child has cancer, or whatever, or something happens in your family and all of a sudden it goes upside down. So I always feel, don't overplan. Now, you mentioned about 3-year blocks. Can you just give a kind of what you mean by that? Because I'm not even sure I know. No, I don't.
There's too much milk in my tea.
I didn't make it.
So look, it is a relationship, right? It's a two-way thing, and I think that we take pride in certain elements of community or Muslim marriages that I think are worthy in some respects, but I think they also mask other shortcomings. For example, marriages bring families together, and we know that. And marriages by design are not designed to be secret. I remember the question of the secret marriage being put to a very experienced scholar a few years ago, and and the question was about the technical legality of it. And his point was that, look, marriages are just not by design secretive. You know, they are designed to be open. They're designed to be sort of like community celebrations, and they bring people together. So the very idea of the secret marriage is a misnomer. There's something there wrong to begin with. Marriage and secrecy don't normally go together. And it's great that people come together, families come together, but do you know what? At the heart of it is still a couple. And one of the intrusions into marriage is an intrusion into that private space of the couple. And there will be people here that know where I'm going with this, and that's to do with at the heart of it, it's one person and another person together. And that is what really matters. And you have to take that very seriously. Whilst it's great that families are brought together, at the heart of it is still a couple, and sometimes you have to fight within yourself for that couple. Now, Professor Ibrahim Musa spoke about the kind of what was almost described as a pathetic situation between people and the scholars, and people looking for magic answers and not taking ownership of their position as people. And it's the same with marriage. You have to take ownership within that partnership. You have to play your part, and the other person has to play their part. And isn't really that's what we're told, that when we go into the grave, we go as individuals. So we have to take ownership not just of our life, but our role within that marriage. And we also have to work as a team. I have this saying that the marriage begins when the wedding ends. And sometimes I say it to people and they kind of look at me, what do you mean? What do you mean? And look, the marriage begins when the wedding ends. I mean, you can have the fanfare, but the real work actually starts afterwards when the dust settles. And this is where I think, in the same way that you plan a project and you plan initiatives and that you plan business plans, you have to kind of sit down and plan and work through your marriage. And so the 3-year block idea was something that I was speaking to about when somebody had a sort of baby, and he said, how do you do it? You've got 4 kids, they've grown up. And I say, look, you don't look at it in such a big way. You just look at 3 years at a time, because you can't really see beyond 3 years. And it was just like a rough demarcation. But the point is about the importance of planning. And sometimes this can be uncomfortable, but it does need to be done. And I think it's really important that people take individual agency for their marriage, because it's part of your life. So it's like taking agency of your life, right? And so that's why I think that is very important.
I'm just going to open it up to you now, but I just want to make one other point about, because from experience, and you described actually what seems to me anyway, a very beautiful relationship with your now in-laws, which I think is an amazing thing. Of course, there'll be people in here who are married. There might even be people in here who are divorced who haven't had quite such a good relationship with their partner's family. Mm-hmm. And it can be very, very challenging. And I think it's along the lines of what Nav is saying about making sure the connection between the two people remains as strong as it can, and try somehow to work out the best way to deal with what can sometimes be difficult families. What I feel very strongly about as a woman is the stuff that I often hear from other women about their mother-in-law, in a way which I just find disrespectful, which I find problematic. Because look, at the end of the day, I will sit here and say to you, I've got, mashallah, a very good relationship with my mother-in-law, but that stuff doesn't come by itself. You have to actually make that work, and it will come with its frustrations. But I can sit here and tell you now, it never, ever works if you try, as a woman, to put yourself in between the son and the mum. It doesn't work. So there's no point in even approaching it in that way. You have to try and find ways to be respectful. I can honestly sit here and say that and I'm no angel on many things, but on this one, I take it very seriously. I never even bother to try and talk bad about his mum with him, because he doesn't want me to do that, and it will ruin so many other things. So I just wanted to make that point. And the thing about families, of course, in our case, we have families from different backgrounds. You may have families who are both Muslim, but can also be from very different backgrounds. And some of that stuff is challenging, and you have to just look for the bits that work, the people that can click. Try when you can to bring both families or people from both families together in the same space, because often that doesn't often happen beyond the wedding. But you have to make these things happen. That's what, however tiring and however difficult some of that stuff might be, I think these are some of the things that really, really can cement the relationship, as well as then. And of course, you're modeling for your own children as well. They will do what they see you doing. And so I just wanted to make that point. I thought it would be, I really feel very strongly about that.